Welcome. My name is George Shirk, and I am going to tell you about our trip to Alaska in the summer of 2017. This is my wife, Diane, and our family. We traveled in a 12-passenger van pulling a 6-foot by 12-foot trailer. We built beds into this trailer, and this is where we slept every night but one. We packed enough of food to last for 5 weeks. Then we headed west. Needless to say, it took a few days to get there. Here we are driving through Canada, and the canola fields were in full bloom. Our first tourist destination was in Dawson Creek, British Columbia. This is the start of the Alaska Highway. The Alaska Highway was built in 1942 by the U.S. military. It starts in Dawson Creek, British Columbia, and ends at Delta Junction, Alaska. Our next stop was the historic Kiskatinaw Curved Bridge. This bridge is special in several ways, as it is original, it's curved, and it is still open for tourists to drive across. We then continue north on the Alaska Highway. We will continue to show videos and still pictures throughout this travelogue. Please enjoy them. There was some nice scenery at Stone Mountain and Summit Lake. These sheep were at the edge of this narrow road.
That's exciting!
Children ride sheep. 4.
This is the Muncho Lake region, which we thought was the nicest scenery along the Alaska Highway. That Muncho Lake region is also where we saw the most wildlife along the Alaska Highway. We saw this bear, a moose, and a little farther down the road we counted 60 bison in this herd. We stopped our vehicle on the road for 20 minutes without any other traffic coming up behind us. We had the place to ourselves. Our next destination was Liard Hot Springs. We arrived here in the evening and the campground was already full, so we needed to park in the overflow parking area. We also parked in the middle of the parking lot because the edge spaces were full also. We slept well that night without too many mosquitoes bothering us, but the next morning we noticed that fellow campers over by the woods were wearing head nets as they packed up. This surprised us because we did not have any mosquitoes in the middle of the parking lot where we were at. So we talked with these people and commented about this. Those folks then explained to us that mosquitoes need vegetation. They explained that mosquitoes would not bother you out in the middle of an open parking lot. That was good news for us because we did not have mosquito netting in our trailer. So from then on, we always parked in the middle of open parking lots when we were looking for a place to stop for the night. The next morning, we went swimming at the hot springs. Then we continued north into Yukon territory and soon arrived at Watson Lake. Watson Lake is home to the famous Signpost Forest. Here, a homesick soldier erected a sign with the name of his hometown on it. Ever since then, people from all over the world bring signs of their hometowns. This is a replica of the original sign. You can find anything imaginable in this signpost forest. This fellow used a hockey stick for a sign. This fellow from Switzerland used a ground shovel. Someone even used a toilet seat. And I brought a sign along also. This bridge at Teslin is the most photographed bridge along the Alaska Highway. Now we drive across it. Then this is the Teslin River Bridge. And we continue north on the Alaska Highway to Whitehorse. This is possibly the world's largest weather vane. We did not spend a lot of time in Whitehorse, but here we left the Alaska Highway and turned north onto Klondike Highway to Dawson City. We drove north for an hour, then stopped at a place called Braeburn Lodge. These folks make enormous sticky buns, and we have a video of that.
You're going to go to Belgium and picture. You better turn around and have a smile.
Standing over back with me. I'm taking that piece.
Cut it.
Yep, go ahead.
We have to cut it in pieces.
I'm the biggest piece. I'm that whole thing.
And the sticky buns were delicious. After eating the sticky buns, we leave Braeburn Lodge and again head north on the Klondike Highway, heading for Dawson City. This is Dawson City. I took this picture with my drone on the following day. Here you can see the muddy waters of the Yukon River flowing from right to left. On the far side you see the clear waters of the Klondike River entering into the Yukon. About 12 miles upstream on the Klondike River is a small tributary where gold was discovered in 1896. This sparked the famous gold rush of 1898. We had studied this before our trip, and it was of interest to us to go and see these places. But first we toured the streets of Dawson City. This city has ordinances in place to keep the buildings looking old-fashioned. Then we headed down the road to the valley where gold was discovered. Our first stop was dredge number 4. Here we took a guided tour of this large wooden structure that was once used for dredging gold. It works much the same way as a modern-day combine. This arm on the front had a chain of buckets on it that was used to dig up dirt. Each bucket weighed a ton. The dirt then went into this barrel, and only the fines were allowed to fall through. The larger stuff went up this conveyor belt on the back and out onto the tailing piles. Our next stop was Claim 33. These people teach tourists how to pan for gold. We paid $15 for a small bag of pay dirt along with a demonstration on how to use the pan. This dirt had a few pieces of gold placed into it. This gold was bought separately and put into the bag just for people like us. We took a video of this demonstration, which we will show you now.
Okay, so first thing we're going to do is just fill our pan a little less than half with water. Yep, that's good. Now you want to shake it side to side. You want to get that gravel moving, yeah. Gold is 19 times heavier in water, 6 times heavier in gravel. Now you're going to keep shaking, tilt your pan to me, get all the gravel to the front. Start off and dip. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 or 5 little shakes, pour it off. 4 more dips. 1, 2, 3, Now I'm right at towards the end if you want to stop and just watch me. So I'm just gonna dip and dip.
The gold won't go.
And see the gold there? That gold's not moving. Look, nice and heavy. It's how many times heavier in water?
Right. 19.
Right on. Bonanza! And we call them little clinkers. It ain't gold nuggets. It ain't gold dust. Just little clinkers.
Clinkers.
Yeah. So you can finish on. Good. Yeah, always get it in the crease. And just let all that water out. It'll push it out. Watch. And that one is being stubborn.
Yeah.
Just hang on to it. Pull it back. Yeah.
Now you should put water in and wash it off.
After finding the gold, they placed it in this vial along with a card for a souvenir. Then we continued up the road. Our next stop was Discovery Claim. This is the place where gold was discovered in 1896. Then we continue farther up the road to Claim number 6. This place is open to the public. Anyone can try their hand panning for gold. But there is not much chance of finding any because this place had already been mined commercially. It's basically just a place for tourists to have some fun and to take some pictures. After touring Dawson and the goldfields, we headed west to the top of the World Highway. This map shows a line with 3 different colors representing 3 different roadways. These 3 roads are called the Klondike Loop. Leaving Dawson, we needed to get onto this ferry to cross the Yukon River. The top of the World Highway started on the other side of the river. Here we are looking back towards Dawson. The Yukon River has very swift water. Here are a few pictures of the top of the World Highway. We really enjoyed driving this road. We soon came to the most remote border crossing between the United States and Canada. Finally, we are in Alaska. Then we head southwest on the Taylor Highway. We have now completed the Klondike Loop and are again heading west on the Alaska Highway. This was a nice rest area where we stopped for the night. Here we are eating breakfast, and the children each found their own spot to eat their cereal. We soon arrived at the small town of Tok. Here we stopped at the visitor center before continuing north on the Alaska Highway to Fairbanks. We really enjoyed the Ice Museum at Fairbanks. They first showed us a video and told us many things about ice. Then they gave us coats and left us go see the ice sculptures. They even had a slide made of ice. Our next destination was Pioneer Park. Here you can find numerous old buildings from the area that were all brought to one place to make a museum. They even had a small train, which we enjoyed. Leaving Fairbanks, we head south on the park's highway to Denali National Park. This is Denali National Park. We first toured the visitors center and then drove our vehicle 15 miles into the park. We had to turn around at the Savage River. You need to ride a shuttle bus if you want to go the rest of the way into the park. That evening, we needed to drive quite a few miles away from the park before we found a pull-off that allowed overnight parking. This was the fullest pull-off where we stopped for the night. The next day, we returned to the national park to watch a sled dog demonstration.
Are you guys ready to see the sled dog team in action?
Yeah. Well, how powerful they are.
After Denali, we continued south on the park's highway. Somewhere near Wasilla, we came upon this man walking along the road with his dog and reindeer. We asked him if we could pet the reindeer for a small tip, and he allowed us.
This is Rowdy.
Rowdy.
He's friendly.
Okay.
You guys like the reindeer? Oh, yeah.
Our next stop was the Iditarod Sled Dog Race Headquarters and Museum. Here, a musher gave us rides on a cart pulled by sled dogs. And then we bought a puppy souvenir for each of the children. Our next stop is in Anchorage. Here we spent some time at Lake Hood Seaplane Base and watched the airplanes take off. Next, we head south of Anchorage and then stopped along the Turnagain Arm to watch a board tide come in. In this scenario, the remnants of the old tide going out push back against the new tide coming in, which creates a wave. This was a very small board tide. Sometimes this wave is as tall as 8 feet. Locals often ride this wave with their paddleboards. Even the train went past while we were watching. The Alaska Railroad is the only railroad owned by a state. We continue south onto the Kenai Peninsula. We briefly stopped at the Russian River Ferry to take some pictures and watch these fishermen. We stopped in for a brief visit with the Matt Snader family. Matt wrote a few books about moving to Alaska. He was in the middle of canning salmon and even shared a few fillets with us. He said he gets visitors once or twice every week. Then we continue south to Homer and the Homer Spit. We took this picture along Skyline Drive. Homer is at the end of the road. Here we had to turn around and we officially start heading back home again. These are businesses located along the Homer Spit. We stayed at this campground overlooking the Homer Spit, and that evening we enjoyed some of the fish meat Matt Snader had shared with us. It was delicious. We are now heading north on the Sterling Highway, and we again pass through Anchor Point. This is the westernmost point of North America's road system. Our next destination is the small town of Seward. Here we were lucky to get a campsite by the water's edge. The next day, we took a boat tour of the Kenai Fords National Park. This boat tour was a little expensive, but we saw a lot of wildlife. And the highlight of this boat ride was to watch this killer whale. And on the way back, they served us some fresh baked chocolate chip cookies. Our next destination is the small town of Whittier. We had to drive through a long tunnel to get there. This tunnel is shared by the railroad, and the traffic takes turns going in either direction. It was very foggy at Whittier, and there wasn't much to see there, so we turned around and came right back again. We saw a number of these signs along the Sterling Highway. It is illegal to hold up traffic. Our next destination is Valdez. To get there, we drive east on the Glen Highway, then south on the Richardson Highway. We saw some nice scenery along these roads. When we arrived at Valdez, the first thing we did was circle around town looking for a playground for the children to play on. This is where we usually ate our meals. The next day, we stopped in at this tackle shop to buy fishing licenses and rent another fishing line. Then we went fishing. The fishing was fun. The meat was delicious, and we caught a lot of them. But then it was time to head on over to the fish cleaning station to cut and pack our fish. The city of Valdez has an awesome fish cleaning station. It is open to the public, free of charge, and set up very well. And when you are finished, you just open up the water valves and flush all the gutters down the chute. Then, after cutting and packing our fish, we drop them off at the freezers to have them frozen overnight. The next morning, we picked up our frozen fish before taking an aerial picture of Valdez. When leaving Valdez, we saw this bear along the road eating a fish, so we stopped to take a picture. Leaving Valdez, we again head north on the Richardson Highway. At Mound 94, we stop to take a close-up look of the Alaska pipeline. These mountains are part of Wrangell St. Elias National Park. At 18,000 feet, they are the tallest mountains we saw on our trip. Our next destination is Haines. To get there, we again drive back to Tok, then take the Alaska Highway south to Haines Junction. We stopped at the border crossing to take more pictures. Here, our children are all lined up with their right foot in Alaska and their left foot in Yukon. They are standing by age order. Their names are Julia, Wesley, Lydia, Bethany, Jeffrey, Daniel, Michael, and Carolyn, the youngest, is not pictured here. Then we continue south on the Alaska Highway until we reach Haynes Junction. Here we turn south on the Haynes Highway and drive on down to Haynes. The Haynes Highway had some of the nicest scenery we saw while driving the roads in Alaska. Just before reaching Haynes, we saw this contraption in the Chilkoot River. Looks like the state is doing some kind of a fish study. Then we arrive at Haynes. They had some very beautiful scenery, and we also found a nice picnic area that we used a few times. But the highlight at Haynes was watching the grizzly bears in the Chilkoot River. We saw 13 grizzlies one evening, and we'll show you a 7-minute video of this.
Jeez, hurry up. I'll pick that ball.
Get Mom here. Michael, back out.
Let's back up, Wednesday. They'll get us.
She's eating a fish. It's recording what you're saying, Lydia. I got it.
I would like to know.
Leaving Haines, we take the ferry over to Skagway. This is the Alaska Marine Highway. This boat will go up and down the southeast shores of Alaska, stopping at numerous small towns. Depending where you are going, you may be on the boat for a while. Some foot travelers even set up tents on the top deck. Then we arrive at Skagway. Today, Skagway is mostly a cruise ship tourist town. The roads were full of buses and the sidewalks were full of people. We could not enjoy this place until we parked our own vehicle and joined the crowd on the sidewalk. Skagway, however, played an important part during the gold rush years of 1897 to 1898. Stampeders would typically board ships at Seattle, Washington, sail north on the Inside Passage, stop at Skagway, cross the mountain on foot to the headwaters of the Yukon River, where they would build boats and continue north to Dawson and the goldfields. Crossing the mountains was the hardest part for the stampeders. They had two trails to choose from. Most of them chose the Chilkoot Trail, which started at Dyea. The Chilkoot Trail was shorter, but it had a steep mountain peak to cross at the summit. Now, keep in mind, the goldfields were located in Canada, and the Royal Mounted Police required that everyone brought a year's worth of supply with them. They did not want stampeders heading into the wilderness to starve. This year's worth of supply weighed around 2,000 pounds. They called it their ton of goods. Now, also keep in mind, this trail could only be traveled on foot. These people had 2,000 pounds of goods to be transported from the docks at Dyea to the shores of Bennett Lake. Let's say, for example, a man could carry 75 pounds on his back at one time. This means he would carry one pack for several miles, set it down, go back, get another pack, carry it for several miles, set it down, and continue to shuffle his ton of goods along the 30-mile trails up to the shores of Bennett Lake. So if you divide 2,000 pounds by 75, it means these people made 26 round trips in order to transport their ton of goods across the mountain. It also means they traveled around 1,500 miles in the process. This picture shows the steepest part of the trail at Chilkoot Pass. Indians had cut steps into the ice to make a trail. The stampeders called this the Golden Stairs. This should help you understand why a railroad was built across the mountains. The White Pass was chosen for the new railroad, connecting Skagway with Whitehorse. Dyea soon became a ghost town. Today it is part of a National Historical Park. Today, the train is a major tourist attraction as its scenic beauty rivals the trains of Switzerland. This picture shows the foot trail of 1898 crossing at White Pass. This is the international boundary between United States and Canada. This is also where the Northwest Mounted Police registered every stampeder heading north. This is also where our train ride stops, and we again head back down the mountain. Leaving Skagway, we head north and spent the night at Carcross. Carcross is located at the north end of Bennett Lake. It was at the south end of this lake that 10,000 stampeders spent the winter of 1897 to 98 building boats. Then, in the springtime, when the ice went out, 7,000 homemade boats sailed across this lake heading north for the Yukon River. Leaving Carcross, we now have a 600-mile drive to our last destination in Alaska, the small town of Hyder. We had a flat tire along this road, and so we stopped at this small shop in Stewart, Canada, for a new spare. They had everything we needed, and before we left, I asked them if they had any drinking water that we could have. To my surprise, they said, "Sure, just pull around the back." I would have never guessed that an establishment like this would have such a nice place in the backside to get drinking water. This is Hyder, Alaska, and there is no border control here. The primary attraction in Hyder is Salmon Glacier and bear viewing at Fish Creek. We drove this road up to the viewing area at Salmon Glacier. I thought this was the nicest scenery we saw in Alaska. On the way up, we even found some snow along the road to play in. That evening, we ate supper at the bus. My wife and I had stopped here on our honeymoon 13 years prior to this, and so we stopped here again for some fish and chips. After supper, we head over to the bear viewing platform and got some video of grizzly bears catching salmon in the creek.
Oh, it's great.
So let me see who that is. See if I can see him. Maybe 4 o'clock. He's jumping around.
After Hyder, we head east. Here are a few camper vehicles we saw on our trip. We drove the Icefields Pkway through the Canadian Rockies on the way home. This section of road was more scenic than any road we drove in Alaska. We are now driving through Montana. Our next destination is Pompey's Pillar. This is the place where William Clark wrote his name in the rock when on the Lewis and Clark expedition. We then continue south and spend a day in Yellowstone. Our main interest was to go swimming at the confluence of the Boiling River and the Gardner River. There's a small area where you have hot water meeting cold water, and there's a very small area where you can find some warm water to sit in. Then we continue south through Yellowstone before driving past the Grand Tetons and then heading east. Somewhere in Nebraska, we stopped at this Pony Express Museum. This is an old house where a station master lived in at one time. Last of all, we spent the weekend with relatives in Missouri and watched a total solar eclipse. Then, after 36 days on the road, we are at home again.
Too good to be true.